Hallo ihr Lieben, heute geht es um ein Thema, das mich sehr stark persönlich berührt, nämlich Diabetes Typ 2. Heute wissen wir, dass Diabetes nicht mehr in einer Sackgasse enden muss. Wir haben mit der Ernährungsexpertin Brenda Davis gesprochen und sie verrät uns heute im Interview, wie sie in den letzten 35 Jahren Diabetes bei ihren Patienten geheilt hat. Willkommen zurück bei The Habit Rabbit, eurem Kanal für veganes Leben. Ich bin Thomas und wir hatten auf der VegMed in Berlin die Gelegenheit, mit Ernährungsberaterin Brenda Davis zu sprechen. Sie behandelt nicht nur seit vielen Jahren Patienten und verbindet das mit wissenschaftlicher Forschung, sondern hat auch schon 9 Fachbücher darüber geschrieben. Wie ihre Erfahrungen mit Diabetes sind aus den vielen Jahren, das berichtet sie euch jetzt im Interview. Hello Brenda Davis, you're a dietitian for more than 35 years now. And we just heard you talk about diabetes and how you can reverse it. What is going on when you have diabetes in your body and in your cells?
Yeah, so diabetes is such an interesting disease because it really is a disease of lifestyle. It's a disease of overconsumption and underactivity. And, it's a disease really of your body becoming resistant to the insulin you're making. And eventually your beta cells start to fail as well.
And the insulin regulates blood sugar, no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So insulin is, some people describe it as the key that unlocks the gates of the cell that allow sugar to come in so the sugar can be burned for energy. Okay. And so if you don't have that key to open that door to unlock the gates, then sugar builds up in your bloodstream and gets higher and higher. And unless you can deal with that, you will end up becoming a person with diabetes.
In what does it result if the blood sugar is getting too high in the blood?
Well, if you can imagine your body awash with a syrupy fluid, you get glycation, the protein and sugar sticking together, and it causes problems from 2 perspectives. From your micro and vascular diseases, it increases your risk of heart disease and all of the macrovascular problems, but also microvascular, so your kidneys and your eyes, and so it damages the functioning of all of your body cells. When your body, instead of a watery fluid floating around, you've got this syrup floating around. It's not good news.
Okay. So I have a family member who died because of diabetes. His diagnosis was when he was 70 years old.
Yes.
So he had 16 more years to live afterwards. And he had very big problems to walk. So he had to watch every step because he couldn't feel anymore his feet. Is it because the blood cannot go, or is it nerves dying?
Yeah, well, I'm really sorry about your family member, and
Thank you.
I can relate because my father died of diabetes as well when he was 76 years old, so exactly the same. And it is just a horrendous disease, but the problems with feeling in the feet, it's, you develop this thing called peripheral neuropathy, where your nerves are damaged down to your extremities, and so you just don't feel as you should.
And that's because of the high blood sugar? It damages the nerves?
Absolutely damages everything. Okay. And so it's a lot of people, they have also intermittent claudication in their legs, so they don't have blood flow in their legs, and they start, a lack of blood flow affects their
it destroys the cells.
And so it's all interrelated, and they have a hard time just walking across a room because they'll be in pain because of it. So it's a really horrible disease, and what's so hard, I have many relatives with diabetes. It's very high rates on my father's side. And what's so sad to me is this is a disease that never needs to happen. It just doesn't need to happen. It's completely avoidable. As a matter of fact, there are some populations in the world where diabetes is almost non-existent. And what's even more interesting is some of the populations where diabetes was almost non-existent 70 or 80 years ago have the highest rates of diabetes in the world now.
Yeah, you mentioned it in your talk in the Marshall Islands. Yeah.
They had almost no diabetes 80 or 100 years ago. Now they have, 31% of the adults have type 2 diabetes.
So it cannot be just the genes who
it's absolutely not. As a matter of fact, what's really interesting is epigenetics. So what's more important than your genes are the things that turn on and off genes, epigenetics. And so you can have a gene for diabetes, but if that gene never gets turned on, you won't develop diabetes.
Okay. So on the Marshall Islands, the gene was never turned on because they didn't had the habits.
They were lean. They lived off the land, so they ate unprocessed foods. All they ate was plants and fish, and so very lean, very active, and there was no diet. When you live like that, you don't get diabetes. But they became sedentary, and they started eating processed foods. That's what causes diabetes, and they became overweight.
Yeah. Let's get more into the processed foods, because my family member, he loved candy bars and very meat and rich foods, the typical German foods he loved. And what is the cause? Because in the standard it's called the sugar is a problem. Yeah. Is it really the sugar, or what's causing it?
It's a combination of many things. So yes, sugar causes it. Yes, the fat in meat causes it. Yes, trans fatty acids cause it. But really overeating causes it. So you can take a population, and if they're not overeating and they're lean, very lean, they could have a little bit of meat, or they could have a little bit of sugar, and they'd probably be just fine. It's when you're over-consuming those things, and when they make up the bulk of your diet, that, a lot of people say, oh, everything in moderation. Well, everything in moderation is fine and dandy if most of that moderate food intake is reasonably healthy foods. But everything in moderation is a disaster if everything you're eating kills you, is harmful to health. Moderation will still kill you. So I think we have to be very, very careful that the majority of what we're eating. So even if you look at people in the blue zones, for example, where, we have the longest lived, healthiest people on the planet, most of them have a little bit of animal products, not all of them, but there's a very small amount, and they still do really well, but the bulk of their diet is plant-based. So you don't necessarily need to be completely vegan to be healthy. We see Olympic athletes who are omnivores. We see rocket scientists who are omnivores. There are a lot of different dietary patterns that can support human health. But I think what's really important to recognize is that a vegan diet also can support human health, but you do so without causing pain and suffering in animals and leaving a much softer carbon footprint. And if you're trying to reverse disease that already exists, there's nothing more powerful than a vegan diet, because you're getting rid of not just the and I should say a well-planned vegan diet, because a vegan diet can be Coke and potato chips. Those are completely vegan foods. So a whole food, plant-based, vegan diet is what we need for reversing disease. So you're getting a lot of fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants. And that diet is very, very powerful, because studies very clearly show that when you get your protein from animal foods, your risk of diabetes increases. So meat, red meat especially, and the worst is processed red meat, sausages and frankfurters and all of these processed salt and nitrate added meats are very, very risky where diabetes is concerned. So, like I say, you can be an active person and have an omnivorous diet that has a lot of whole plant foods and a lot of fiber and still do pretty well. But in terms of reversal, you're going to get better results on a plant-based diet.
So my family member could have reversed it.
Oh, absolutely.
So
question.
Can everybody who has diabetes reverse it?
It's probably not 100% because it depends on how much damage you've done to your pancreas.
Okay.
But in my experience, most people can reverse it. So there are some people for whom the beta cells are dead. They, over time, what happens...
The beta cells produce the
insulin.
Okay.
And so what happens over time is your body is overproducing insulin to try to compensate for that high blood sugar. So your pancreas puts out tons of insulin, and eventually it can't keep up. And so the beta cells can fall asleep and stop producing as much insulin, and then it's real trouble. So then often you have to start on insulin injections and so forth. For some people, the beta cells fall asleep, but can be reawoken, I guess you could say. For some, the beta cells are dead. And so there are tests. There's a test called C-reactive protein that can actually tell you how much functioning beta cells you have left and give you an idea of, but regardless of whether or not your beta cells are dead, a plant-based diet will dramatically reduce your insulin requirements. A whole food, well-planned, plant-based diet. But I would say in the majority of people, you can completely eliminate type 2 diabetes.
And if you are switching to a whole food plant-based diet, can you then eat as much as you want from everything plant-based?
Yeah, a lot of the experts say absolutely yes, unlimited amounts if you're eating low fat. So they'll say, no nuts and seeds and avocados and such, and then you can just eat as much as you want. My experience has been different. So I think they've had reasonable success with that approach. But what my experience has been with working with clients and in the Marshall Islands is when we say unlimited bread and rice and all of these concentrated carbohydrates, is we can't get people completely off of insulin. So we have better success if we say you base the diet on non-starchy vegetables and beans, a little bit of nuts and seeds, intact whole grains, but we're for the concentrated carbohydrates, which is the whole grains and the starchy vegetables, we do some portion control. So yes, you can have a little bit with each meal, but not unlimited. Because if you do unlimited, the amount of carbohydrate that your body has to deal with can be just too much.
Okay. And if you have reversed and your insulin level is good and you get rid of the insulin to take and the pills, do you still need to follow the non-starchy vegetable diet, or can you then include something more again?
And even before that, you can have some of these starchy vegetables, but just more portion controlled. After the insulin resistance is gone and you get your body working really well again, you can actually increase your intake of those things, just so long as you're not increasing it so much that you put on weight. So you need to keep lean in order to reverse diabetes.
Okay. And maybe we can come back to how it functions with, or what really causes the cells to lock the door.
Yes.
What is causing the door to be locked?
Yes, so what causes the door to be locked is there's no insulin, or the insulin isn't working properly. One of the two. So sometimes the body's just not making enough anymore. But more often, the body's producing plenty, but for some reason, there's that it can't attach to the receptor site that sends a signal to open the door. So what you're asking is, why can't it attach to that receptor site? And so the reason is a combination of things. Sometimes there's just too much fat there that you get. There's this combination. Inflammation is hugely important. So an inflammation is a product of many things, including when you get a lot of visceral fat or fat that is in and around the organs, that kind of big hard belly fat. It can cause insulin resistance, so it can stop the insulin from attaching to the receptor site.
Okay. So overweight is one big factor.
Overweight is a huge factor. And then inflammation, oxidative stress can contribute, and something we call lipotoxicity, which is fat being stored where it shouldn't be. So if you're cells become so filled with fat, it can interfere with cell signaling. And so even if the receptor, the insulin attaches to the receptor can't send the signal because there's just too much fat there.
So it's not just that the key hole is locked to, you can put in the key, but it doesn't notice that it is a key.
Yes, exactly.
Even if you can put it in.
That's right.
All right.
And it doesn't send the signal to the gate to open the gate. Exactly, that's signaling within the cell.
Yeah. And oxidative stress and the inflammation, which kind of foods are, we had it already, kind of, which are the most promoting?
So when you think about, I mean, there's really the four things. There's inflammation, oxidative stress, lipotoxicity, and then dysbiosis or unhealthy gut flora that can all be contributing factors to insulin resistance and to the development of diabetes. And so, but if we look at inflammation and oxidative stress specifically, there are many foods that are increase inflammation and oxidative stress, and there are many foods that decrease these things. So the foods that probably increase these things the most are processed foods. Fried foods are terrible. Deep fried foods are terrible.
So because of the fatty acids.
Because you cause oxidation of the fats, and so you increase oxidative stress, but you also produce products that are inflammatory, products of oxidation like aldehydes and things like that that can trigger inflammation as well. And also saturated fats can increase inflammation. Trans fatty acids are terrible, which are partially hydrogenated fats in foods that we're starting to weed out of the food system, but there's some that's still there. And then we've got things like Nu-5GC is a pro-inflammatory molecule in meat, especially red meat. There is heme iron in meat that when we consume in excess, it can be very pro-inflammatory. It can be a pro-oxidant, cause oxidative stress as well. So these refined carbohydrates can definitely be part of the problem. So refined starches and sugars. And then on the other side, the things that can be very protective are all of the phytochemicals and antioxidants and really the things that are loaded in plant foods, so colorful plant foods especially, and nuts and seeds and legumes and whole grains. And even within those categories, the more colorful options within those categories tend to be more protective. So, for example...
you mentioned the rainbow, the more colorful and...
That's right, exactly, and you want to get a range in that rainbow. So even if you're choosing quinoa and you have a choice between black or red and white quinoa, the black or red will have more phytochemicals, or even black or white rice, black or red rice versus brown rice, the black or red would have more phytochemicals. So it's the same if you're choosing a green vegetable. The darker green tends to have more phytochemicals.
What you mentioned earlier with the oxidation of the fatty acids, I think that's very interesting because I haven't heard it before. It's that the fatty acids, you shouldn't eat a nut if it's not tasting fine because the fatty acids are oxidating and are bad.
Yes.
It doesn't taste good because it's bad. So it's the same thing or kind of is happening in the body to the fatty acids in the body.
Absolutely. So you've got oxidation can happen to foods that you fry or foods that get rancid. The fats can become oxidized, but the same thing happens inside your body. And so you can get oxidative stress inside your tissues because that process is occurring in your body.
Okay. And does it happen to, or can it happen to every fatty cell? So even if you are lean, it can happen to you, or?
It can. And so what we see sometimes is we see very lean athletes with a major heart attack. And you look and you say, how can that 40-year-old athlete, the person that's, running marathons, how could they're so lean, how could they have a coronary artery that's so diseased? And so what we eat, regardless of how much we exercise, those components of those foods are what we build our body cells with. If you're loading up with, even if you're not eating excess calories, but you're eating a lot of saturated fat, a lot of trans fatty acids, your cell membranes, it changes the flexibility, the permeability, the cell-to-cell signaling. It affects all the functioning of your cell membranes are affected hugely. It affects inflammation in your body, and so it affects how much plaque you lay down. Even if you look at people who die, young men in their 20s, who die during a combat, for example, in a war, and you look at their arteries, most of them have fatty streaks or the beginnings of atherosclerosis, even at
because
that age.
Because of the oxidation. Yeah.
Because of, yes, exactly. So, and inflammation. And so even if you're lean, you can be damaging your body a lot by eating harmful or, foods that are not optimal for human health.
Yeah. Wow, that's so amazing that the nutrition has such a power to reverse diabetes. And
well, it is so interesting because I think what people need to understand is everything that you put in your mouth is what your body's made of. You think about the building blocks of muscles, the proteins, all, everything that we're made of comes from what we eat. Yeah. So it wouldn't even make sense that it doesn't affect how our body functions. It has to. Yeah. That's what it does.
Wow. Thank you very much. Before we end, could you please tell where the people can find more information about you or your books, and if they are placed?
Well, they can. I have a website, brendadavisrd.com. And also I teach at a place called Living Light in California, Living Light Culinary Institute, and I do, my writing partner Vasanto and I do the nutrition part of that program. And then the other thing is we do write books with the book publishing company. It's called the Book Publishing Company in Summertown, Tennessee. And we are in the process of 2 new books on diabetes. Okay, and so one is called the Kick Diabetes Cookbook. And so it's really the practical guide. This is what you need to do. This is how you do it. And so that book will be out in July. And then we're also in the process of writing a more comprehensive information book that will probably be out, I would say, maybe January or February of next year.
Are the books in English only, or will they be translated?
Right now, they'll just be done in English, but our experience is once they've been out for a few months, then other publishers start to pick them up, and so we're hoping that they will be translated into many languages. So far, our books have been done, translated into 13 languages. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for your great talk before. It was really a pleasure and very interesting. And it's possible to view it also on YouTube because ProVeg will upload it.
That's great.
And
thank you so much.
we can relink it when it's uploaded. And thank you very much for your time and for your great work in the last 35 years. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Ich würde mir heute wünschen, dass ich die Informationen schon 10 Jahre früher gehabt hätte. Wenn ihr jetzt jemanden kennt, der Diabetes hat oder wo Diabetes in der Familie liegt, teilt gerne dieses Video, damit möglichst viele von den Informationen erfahren. Vielen Dank an der Stelle nochmal an Brenda Davis, dass sie sich die Zeit für uns genommen hat und an das gesamte VegMed-Team für die tolle Konferenz. Wenn euch das Video gefallen hat, gebt uns gerne einen Daumen nach oben und abonniert den Kanal, da würden wir uns echt drüber freuen. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal bei The Habit Rabbit, eurem Kanal für veganes Leben.